Jay Quellen. No Jay Quellen here? Balake. Where is Balake at? Aaron.
Aaron, right here, everyone. Happy Monday, and welcome back to the channel. The defense strategy in the Danny Masterson criminal case has already started to fall apart, and we just finished this past Friday. We just wrapped up only the first week of testimony in the case. On Tuesday, the prosecution began direct examination of Jane Doe 1, and that wrapped up on Wednesday. Then the defense team started the cross-examination. That went on until Thursday, and then we had redirect and recross. The vast majority of the cross and the recross was spent walking Jane Doe 1 through various statements that she made at different times to different officers, or one officer and one detective. I think it's actually a couple different officers and one detective, and expecting and asking Jane Doe 1 to account for discrepancies between the reports. Now, mind you, Jane Doe 1 can only represent what it is she recalls saying to the officers and to the detectives. She cannot make any representations as to the accuracy or competency of the officers and the detectives in making their reports. You have a variable there. You cannot hold the victim responsible for any shortfallings that the officers or the detective may have had in making their reports. And yet that is exactly what Masterson's defense attorney, Philip Cohen, was expecting the jury to conclude, that inconsistencies in these reports were due to inconsistencies in Jane Doe 1's story, and the inconsistencies are because she's not being truthful. The story gets worse over time. She keeps coming up with new parts of the story that make it worse. That is what the defense attorney wanted everyone to think. And Jane Doe 1 was on the stand saying, yes, I did mention this. Yes, I did mention that. And of course, who's the jury to believe? Well, towards the end of the day on Friday, the prosecution admitted into evidence a copy of a knowledge report, which is an internal Scientology report that all Scientologists are required to regularly write on each other, to snitch on each other, and inform the Scientology ethics officer of all of the evil bad doings of all of their fellow Scientologists. Well, Jane Doe 1 wrote such a knowledge report on the incident with Danny Masterson. In fact, this report was even written with the help of Scientology's own ethics officer, Julian Schwartz. The report contains the very items that Danny's defense team was trying to say Jane Doe 1 had failed to mention to the police in 2004 when she made her first police report. There were two items in particular, and it had to do with, as part of Jane Doe 1's retelling of the events that occurred and this one night in 2003, she talks about Danny Masterson grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her through Danny's house and then throwing her into a hot tub. Philip Cohen, the defense attorney, kept trying to say, well, you never made any mention in 2004 of being forcefully dragged through the house. How come you never made any mention of this? And Jane Doe 1 kept saying, yeah, I did say that. The officer just didn't put it in the report. The other item has to do with whether a certain firearm was brandished at a particular point in time. And again, the attorney was like, that's a pretty major item to not have mentioned to the police in 2004. And Jane Doe 1 is saying, yeah, I did mention it. I don't know why it wasn't in the report. And no, actually, I take it back. That was one of the items that Julian Schwartz told Jane Doe 1 that she was not allowed to include in the knowledge report. So that's still going to be one inconsistency that Danny's team is going to hold on to. But the fact Philip Cohen spent hours and hours on Thursday and Friday making such a big deal of the fact that there was no mention in the police report about Jane Doe 1 having been dragged through the house. And I guess the prosecution was just giving him enough rope to let him hang himself with this. And I don't know how Philip Cohen wasn't already aware of the contents of this knowledge report that was going to be introduced into evidence. Oh, and by the way, this knowledge report and it being introduced, it's not being introduced only because the knowledge report was written at the time and turned into Scientology. Jane Doe 1 gave the LAPD a copy of this knowledge report right off the bat in the beginning when she made her police report, because the police asked her for any documentation that she had to support, the report that she was filing, and included in the documents she gave to the LAPD was a copy of this internal Scientology report. In any event, I think it's obvious Cohen did know this was going to be introduced as evidence. He just thought that on the one hand, he might be able to prevent it from being admissible to the jury. And on the other hand, he's still going to fall back on the fact that Jane Doe 1 herself even admits that she did intentionally omit things from this report. So Cohen's still going to attack, well, the authenticity of it, or not the authenticity, but the reliability of it. But the fact that Cohen knew that this report existed, I mean, we have to assume that, right? Just the laws of evidence indicate that the defense team would have had copies of everything that the prosecution was going to introduce. The fact that Cohen knew that this report existed, the fact that he knew it specifically included reference of her being dragged through the house, does beg the question, why in God's name would he have spent so much time trying to point out the fact that Jane Doe 1 seemed to have failed to mention being dragged through the house to the LAPD in 2004, knowing that there was a prior written report that had been given to the police that mentioned being dragged? It seems like such a gigantic unforced error. And that's just on the first witness. Today, we are going to see testimony from legendary Hollywood attorney Marty Singer. Marty Singer represented Danny Masterson in 2004 in a secret confidential settlement. This didn't have anything to do with the courts. This was not as part of a civil lawsuit. This was part of a secret, private, confidential settlement that Scientology orchestrated between Danny Masterson and Jane Doe 1. And Marty Singer represented Danny's side of that whole thing. And you might be wondering, how the hell can they have Danny's attorney testify? How can they have Danny's civil attorney testify in the criminal case? Well, Marty's not going to be testifying to anything between him and Danny. He's going to be testifying about other things relating to other parties that are not subject to the attorney-client privilege. So, for example, Jane Doe 1 has said, she's testified, that she wasn't even allowed to keep a copy of this secret agreement, that she was never given a copy, she was never allowed to keep a copy, she wasn't even allowed to touch the pages of this agreement in the meeting where she signed it. And that Marty Singer himself was the one who personally turned the pages so that she wouldn't touch this thing, which is just bizarre. I don't know why that would be, but having Marty up there testifying to this, I believe, is part of the prosecution strategy, to show that the witness has credibility. This sounds like a ridiculous thing that she said, and yet it seems as if Marty Singer is going to take the stand and, I hope, corroborate the testimony that Jane Doe 1 has given. So by the end of today, we'll definitely have some fascinating things to report. But so far, it is not going well for Danny Masterson. For all the money he's paying for these criminal defense attorneys, they did a real crap job in discrediting Jane Doe 1. And I say that as someone who's hoping Danny Masterson goes away to prison for quite a long time. Guys, he might be facing charges for 3 of his victims, but there are 7 or 8, and in fact, victims who have claimed to have been attacked by Danny. And I even personally know of another victim. I've discussed this in my earlier videos. When my wife and I were working in the Sea Organization in Los Angeles, my wife had a position where she was sort of, one way to describe it is a last port of call for people who weren't being helped anywhere else. And when a lot of this stuff started to become public, my wife told me, hey, I know of another Scientologist who came forward and said they were attacked by Danny, and she's still in Scientology, so she's never come forward or gone to the police. So she provided the name of that victim to the LAPD for the LAPD to follow up and see if that woman was willing to cooperate. I doubt that she was. I've never received any confirmation that she was. But if I seem to talk as if Danny is already guilty in my mind, that's because he is guilty in my mind. I understand it's innocent until proven guilty, but that is the legal standard of the law. That is not the standard of common sense. You don't have to pretend like you don't know or don't believe people just because a jury hasn't agreed with you yet. So again, not going well for Danny Masterson, but we'll have a lot more to update. This case is going to go on for about 3 more weeks. Anyway, we'll know more by the end of today, so stay tuned, everyone. That's all I got on this for now. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right